Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining my talk. It's lovely to meet you all, to see you. I'm Ida Hagi from University of Glasgow. I'm a lecturer in TESOL and TEEP and a bit of EAP. Today I'm going to talk you through a project that I did with my colleague Brian, who is not unfortunately here today, on pre-sessional students in terms of their emotional engagement. This is an ongoing project. We started right after the first pandemic summer, where, as you know, all of us pretty much needed to shift to online teaching overnight with a massive cohort of pre-sessional students. So, like many others have, we're pulling our hairs. But one thing we noticed was, we're missing on some aspects of students' experience, particularly their engagement and emotional engagement, and that kind of started everything. So this is a follow-up project to a project we did in the first year of pandemic, and we're hoping to expand it even further. This was done last summer. Anyway, so I'm going to talk to you about some initial findings of the project that we did this summer, as I said, as a follow-up to the initial study on emotional engagement of our pre-sessional students. So in the talk, I'm going to give you a background to the studies, the initial study. I'll talk to you about that first, and then how it links to the current study that I'm going to talk about. I'm also going to talk about student engagement, the models, existing models in the broader education literature, as well as higher education literature, and how it is defined as a construct, and what sort of research we have around the engagement at the moment. Then I will talk to you about the current project, the method, the design, the participants, the context, and what it entailed. And then I will be sharing with you some preliminary results and findings of the study. And then finally, we'll have some brief discussions and implications before moving on into the Q&A part. Okay, but first of all, I'm going to start with a question to you and your engagement. I know it's only been a couple of hours since the conference has started, maybe too soon, but why not? It's maybe not too early to reflect on your engagement so far. So if you could please kindly, if you like, scan the QR code. It will take you to a Menti, and I should start presentation for you to be able to see the question, which I will do now. Can you see the first question? Yeah. I have been engaged with the conference so far, so you can rate it from 1 to 5, with 1 indicating strongly disagree and 5 strongly agree. Sorry, I thought both screens actually show. Don't know why this one is not working. Okay. Sorry that this screen is not working. I don't know how to make it work. Next question. I've been emotionally engaged with the conference so far, whatever that means. Okay, and perhaps we can find out what you were thinking about when you were rating your engagement by indicating in 1 or 2 words the sort of factors that you were thinking about when you say, I'm engaged, what does that mean to me? What does engagement mean? Sorry. Okay. The results here. probably I don't know that. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, unfortunately I can't connect my laptop to the screens. Maybe this may work. No, it's my laptop is a bit. I don't think if it works. Ah, great. So. No, that's actually the computer. Never mind. I can read you the results. If you don't mind, I can show it to you. So, with your engagement, we have something around 3.5, which is good. So you feel somehow engaged, not a bad start. Okay, that's good. Emotional engagement, 3.7. Okay, that's good. And with the factors that you associated to engagement, emotional engagement, we have quite interesting points here. Accessibility, communication, which I was expecting, emotional curiosity, feeling confident, reflection, food, I love that, excited, motivated, curious, navigability, as in like being able to navigate. That doesn't surprise me, given how complicated Warwick campus is. Dialogues, attachment to the content, remembering old friends. I love that bit of it. That really made me emotionally engaged as I stepped into the arts centre and I saw Nigel. Taking away, I suppose, what points from the conference, not food. Listening, communicating again, energized, welcomed, excited. So good. So you can see there's some words that talk about engagement in terms of activities that you've been doing, and some of them in terms of the feelings that you have been experiencing so far in the past few hours. Great. It's actually good to think about this, because obviously when we study engagement, student engagement, you know, we're dealing with human beings just like us. I mean, okay, it is in relation to their studies, but again, it pretty much involves the sort of engagement that we experience in different contexts, like this one, for example, at this conference. Anyway, this is what we're going to talk about, so how our pre-sessional students engage with the pre-sessional course. But I think it's important first to talk a little bit about the background to the study, for those of you perhaps who are not aware of our previous study, because I presented in last BALEAP on that study as well. So, like I said at the beginning, in the first summer of COVID, Glasgow, like any other university, had to shift into online, a pre-sessional course. A few weeks into the course, we noticed that with students not being present on campus and us not having an opportunity to talk to students outside class time, we are missing on certain aspects of their experience, such as, for example, how they're feeling, if they're okay, if they're getting along with, you know, the new environment. Sort of an informal chat that you usually get to have with the students and outside class. And students also started talking about their stress, their concerns, usually during class time when, you know, they're asked to do group work, for example, and sent into breakout room. And when I personally sometimes went to check, they could see that they're talking about other stuff, particularly how they're feeling or what they're stressed about. And we soon realized that they really don't have that opportunity. While we tried to mitigate for that on the course as we were going along, we thought it's best to really investigate that a bit further, more formally through a study. So that year we conducted a study. We looked at the students' emotional engagement. It was a very small-scale study, and we only looked at engagement in terms of the emotional aspect of engagement from a narrow point of view, which I will talk to you about shortly, what I mean. We really had some interesting findings. The one very interesting finding was that the way our students in the pre-sessional course, predominantly international students from East Asian background, perceived engagement was a bit different from what the general literature tells us, which again I will tell you later on in the discussion section, mostly is related to undergraduate students with a different demography. So we became more interested with my colleagues to really explore this further and see what students' educational and cultural background bring with it in terms of, you know, determining how they perceive engagement and how they engage with their courses, given that these were international postgraduate students. So to kind of explore that further, we did a follow-up study which was funded by BALEAP social justice funding to further explore emotional engagement from a wider perspective. Okay, now before I talk you through the project, I think it's important to also review briefly the literature on engagement, what the literature tells us, particularly the broader education, including the higher education literature, how we define this construct. It's a psychological construct, so what sort of models exist, and then what we use in our study to define this construct and explore it in relation to our pre-sessional course. Generally speaking, there are 4 views to engagement in the broader educational research: the behavioral, the psychological, sociocultural, and holistic. So from a behavioral perspective, engagement looks at students' behavior and effective teaching practices. So that is the main focus of behavioral perspective to engagement. From a psychological perspective, engagement is viewed as an internal individual process, which I will unpack in the next slide. And the sociocultural perspective to engagement considers the critical role of sociocultural context. So there is a lot of focus on the context of study experience. And then the holistic is an approach that tries to bring all these different dimensions together. But like I said, because we were interested in our students' emotional engagement, we use psychological perspective to engagement to explore emotional engagement. In the initial study that I mentioned that we did in summer 2022, we only looked at the 3rd component of this perspective, emotion, which has some sub-components. But in this study that I'm reporting on, we looked at 3 components, which are the main components of psychological perspective to engagement. The first of which is behavior. It has some overlapping components to the behavioral perspective to engagement that I mentioned in the previous slide, and it mainly looks at rule following, positive conduct, and participation in curricular and extracurricular activities. So the sort of behavior that the students, these sorts of behavior that students can show in relation to engaging with their studies. Then cognition is another component of engagement from a psychological point of view, which is mostly about strategies that the students employ to actively engage with their learning. And that can include deep learning and self-regulation. Then we have emotion, which is another component of engagement from a psychological perspective, and that looks at enjoyment, interest, and sense of belonging. And finally, we have conation, which looks at belief, courage, energy, commitment, conviction, and change, although majority of studies in the literature, in a broader education literature, suffice to look at behavior, cognition, and emotion to provide a kind of a comprehensive picture of engagement from a psychological perspective. And that's what we did in this study as well. And in the survey that we used, we looked at behavior, cognition, and emotion to define, to monitor students' engagement. So, but why is it important to understand engagement? I mean, I think it's quite obvious. If you look at the literature on engagement in higher education, secondary education, there's a lot of justification. What is very important is quality of study experience. And more and more higher education institutions, particularly with the monetization of higher education, see themselves more responsible and accountable towards the student experience. So it's very important. And usually one step universities, higher education institutions in the UK particularly take to ensure students' engagement and to monitor students' engagement is through surveys. Now, course evaluation or program evaluation surveys, or we have the national survey, which has a section on engagement. But with course and program evaluation surveys, particularly in our case, for example, in our pre-sessional course, when I talk to my colleagues who convene these courses, we realize that that is not directly addressed within the course evaluation, students' engagement. There's only one item, which is about students' overall satisfaction. So there isn't really much for students to, there isn't much opportunity for students to talk about their engagement or tell us how they engage with their course, at least through that survey. Although we try to monitor it through informal ways, but that through, sort of a robust way of collecting data, we don't give them that opportunity. And then in the national survey, for example, that I mentioned, the focus is usually on engagement, but that survey is usually conducted among undergraduate students. So a huge cohort of international postgraduate students is often overlooked in terms of their engagement and our understanding. And given the high percentage of international students occupying postgraduate degrees, it's really important to investigate their engagement as well. Also, we have inclusive pedagogy. This is a key area in social justice, an area that we try to focus on in our study. It's a key component of engaged learning. So an inclusive pedagogy should obviously consider, different students from different educational and cultural background. And for that, like I said in the previous point, it's important for us to understand engagement through the lens of different students coming from different backgrounds. Affective pedagogy is another aspect of education that requires understanding engagement. So we need to consider learners as a whole, which I mentioned in the next bullet point, by which we mean it's not only their cognitive engagement and how they are involved in the learning, but also how they feel and the overall experience of their study life as a whole person is also important. So it's important to understand engagement and its different components. And of course, there is myriad of research in the literature, again, broader education, higher education literature showing a strong relationship between engagement and performance. So it is important to really investigate engagement to ensure that the students perform well, particularly in EAP courses such as pre-sessional courses, which are high stakes. Students need to go, there are some sort of gatekeeping courses. The students need to pass through these courses in order to be admitted to their main degree programs. And even if when they are admitted, it affects the quality of their experience, so that how well they perform in the pre-sessional course, not just to pass it, but also how well they really acquire the sort of skills that we try to equip them with. It is important for them to be able to then perform well in their main degree programs. So, studying engagement, obviously, with the kind of ecological purpose that we had, the need to really understand our students' engagement, we looked at the literature to really see what else is there in the literature that requires further investigation. Some gaps we identified in the literature. First of all, when it comes to studying engagement, there is often a lack of operational definition. So a majority of studies look at one aspect of engagement, for example, behavioral, then create a survey or use existing surveys, and then go ahead to argue whether a group of students are engaged with a given course or not. Whereas we need to have the construct of engagement, first of all, operationally defined within any given context. So there isn't any one global definition of engagement, for example, that we can apply to all studies. And then context of engagement usually is missing in studies. So student engagement with a course usually is what you see on research on engagement, but that is quite broad. When it comes to student engagement, we have student engagement with within the classroom, we have student engagement with their peers, engagement with their teachers, engagement with the broader institution they're studying in. So there are different contexts in which engagement can be actually studied. That is usually also lacking in majority of research. Also, factors affecting the definition of different dimensions. As I just told you earlier, depending on what cohort of student we are focusing on, the way we define engagement might differ. So if, for instance, at the moment in the literature we have these different components, behaviour, cognition, emotion, for example, in relation to students' engagement, this is mostly based on undergraduate home students, for example, in the context of the UK. So by investigating engagement among other cohorts of students, we might be able to broaden our understanding of engagement and make it more inclusive. And then also learner engagement, especially from a psychological perspective. Does that mean, do I have 10 minutes left or 10 minutes past? 10 minutes left. Past. Left? Oh, dear me. Yeah, you're right. Yes, there is a scarcity of research in the context of EAP on students' engagement, and although EAP courses, pre-sessionals and later in sessionals, are I'd like to say, part of mainstream higher education. Still, there are certain features to these courses that require investigation of student engagement with these particular courses. For instance, we have international students, majority of whom use English as a second language, so their language competence might contribute to their engagement with the courses, and of course other factors, so I'm going to rush through. Anyway, so we defined engagement using the psychological perspective. So we had 3 components, and based on that we kind of defined engagement, behavioral engagement, cognitive engagement, and emotional engagement. The context of engagement in our study was classroom and participants, so how students engage with activities within the classroom, whatever happens within the class, and then with their participants, with their peers and teacher. Factors affecting the definition of different dimensions was captured through student journals. Majority of engagement studies use surveys. We tried to use triangulation, so we did a longitudinal study in addition to a survey, which we conducted once midway through the course and once at the end. We also gave students weekly journals to go kind of dig into, factors that they contribute to their engagement and better understand that. And then learner engagement, obviously, the kind of gap in the EAP we tried to fill in by investigating pre-sessional EAP students' engagement. So quick review of questions. So the 4 questions that I'm going to present results for are as follows. What is international students' perceived psychological engagement with the pre-sessional course? What is their perceived stress? Oh, I should have mentioned that another aspect of the study was to investigate well-being and the relationship between well-being and engagement, because that was one of the main incentives for this study. We felt like we don't really have enough opportunities to talk to students about their stress. This is how we define well-being, by the way, another fairly complex construct. But anyway, this is how we define it in this study based on literature. So that was a factor attributed to well-being. So to what extent students felt stressed. Anyway, question 3, what relation existed between students' perceived psychological engagement and their well-being? So was there any relationship between them feeling stressed and then feeling engaged with the course or not? And then what relationship existed between their emotional engagement, which was what we initially focused on, and other dimensions of engagement, behavior and cognition, as we wanted to investigate this aspect of engagement from a broader perspective. So we used triangulation, we used engagement survey. Part of the survey was based on engagement scale, which is a very commonly used scale in educational psychology, and we adapted this the scale from Son and Ruda, which was the closest study to us, online academic course. We also included open-ended items at the end of the survey to further investigate factors contributed to stress based on our students' experience, and then we administered the survey once 4 weeks after an 8-week pre-sessional course, midway through the course and once at the end of the course, to see whether there was any variation to students' engagement with the course and their well-being, i.e. stress. We also had engagement journals. As I said, we use interval contingent journal technique, giving students journals at the end of each week on Friday with some guided questions and some open-ended questions for them to kind of report on their engagement in a diary-like manner, but I'm only going to give you a brief summary of results for the engagement survey, because there's really no time to go into the journals. Anyway, so we invited all our summer pre-sessional students from the June and July entry at Glasgow. Our summer pre-sessional consists of 3 entries, starting from May, generic, June, generic, and then July is discipline specific. So we invited students joining from June right up to the end of the course, and the total number were 472, and out of those 113 completed the first survey, and that's 87 the second survey. And for the survey data, for the scale, we considered all 87 students who completed the first and the second survey. And we had a response 95% confidence level, representing minus plus 10 confidence interval in other words, the sample population. And then we had the weekly journals, which I said, like I said, I'm not going to go through What I really wanted to mention here, and I think it's important for us researchers, particularly doing scholarship with students within our courses, is to make sure that you kind of compensate for the time. It's very, very important from an ethical point of view. So we provided our students with, in an induction for pre-sessional students, with a session on well-being. We talked to them about well-being. For many of them, that was new as a postgraduate student in the UK, what it means, how they can take care of their mental health and well-being, and what support is on offer at university that they can use. And this was a session in which we recruited students, and also we were lucky to have BALEAP social justice funding to provide the participants in the end with some monetary prize and gift vouchers. As you can see, majority of our students, although when we were planning for the study, we were thinking of a hybrid pre-sessional, we ended up having many online students again. That was because of the news surge last year, if you remember, in China, and given that the majority of our students come from that background, again, we ended up having sort of an online pre-sessional. So the focus again is on an online pre-sessional course and students' engagement with that course. But we had, a few students from some other L1 background as well. We also had a good variation of disciplinary background. Unfortunately, in this study, I'm not going to delve into that and the kind of the relationship between discipline and engagement and etc. But that will hopefully, when EAP journals, colleagues working on EAP editorial, EAP journals editorial board, perhaps collaborate and help with the engagement of us researchers as well, I'll be able to share them through publications. In other words, I've been waiting for ages for them to reply back. Okay, so now, perceived engagement and stress. As you can see with engagement, it was relatively high, above midpoint, which was very good. It made us very happy that our students were engaged. And interestingly enough, their engagement actually kind of increased. Not significantly, but increased throughout the course, which was good. With the stress, again, luckily, they didn't consider themselves as too stressed across the course, and it didn't change drastically throughout the course. So good news so far, but like I said, not significantly different in both cases. With engagement and well-being, though, some interesting results emerge. Stress with engagement in general, with all aspects of engagement, as you can see, there was a negative correlation. So whenever stress is high, engagement goes low. Although it's not significant, at least in our study, it wasn't significant, except from emotional engagement. In both the first survey and in the second survey, there was a significantly negative correlation between stress and emotional engagement. So whenever stress went up, emotional engagement went down. Or the other way around, this was a two-tailed correlation. We also did some correlation between engagement, emotional engagement, and other aspects of engagement. And like I said, we wanted to explore this aspect of engagement in a broader sense. And there was a positively significant correlation across all aspects of engagement with emotional engagement. In other words, whenever emotional engagement is high, behavioral engagement and cognitive engagement is high, and the other way around. So it's a two-tailed correlation. So, well, we also looked, I'm going to just briefly talk you through some pointers on students, what factors students contributed to their stress, because that's very important now, as we can see how stress as an indicator of well-being can contribute to engagement. So majority of students refer to workload. Doesn't surprise me. If you are working on pre-sessional, you know that us, lecturers as well, oftentimes find it quite demanding. Assessment and results, yes, doesn't again surprise me because of the high stakeness of the course and the importance of the assessment. Time pressure, something maybe to consider in terms of course design and how to allocate different activities to different weeks. Unfamiliarity, which was related to the online platform, as well as some aspects of the course, some maybe new ways of communicating knowledge, for example, the extended essay, and new forms of genres, for example. L2 competence, which is important, and as I said, is specific to our courses, which are language courses somehow, also contributed to stress. And then peer work as well, in terms of their readiness to work in groups, their how trained they were in that respect. Sometimes lack of that would cause stress as well. Anyway, so quick discussion. I know I'm pretty much, I'll try to finish it in a couple of minutes. As I showed to you through results, stress negatively affects engagement, not significantly, overall engagement, but it does significantly affect emotional engagement. Now, emotional engagement and other dimensions of engagement, behavior and cognition, are related. Therefore, if emotional engagement is constantly affected negatively with stress, those two other are quite vulnerable as well. Now, engagement and academic motivation, there is solid research showing the relationship between these two constructs. So engagement and motivation, they're related constructs, and both of them contribute hugely to students' performance. So if we don't take care of engagement, motivation will be affected. And it's very important with summer pre-sessional students because that's the outset of their study experience. And again, research in education shows that motivation can have a knock-on effect on, there is this cycle of motivation, performance, and if motivation is lower at the initial stage of a course, it can affect how students build motivation again throughout the course. So given that we somehow, with international students that come through pre-sessional courses, we provide them with the first-hand experience of higher education experience in the UK. It's very important for us to take care of that aspect of their experience because that can potentially negatively, if it is not taken care of, affect how they build up motivation along the way. Some suggestions for course design. First of all, it's important to provide students with a gradual move to independent study experience, providing initial guide to choosing optional materials, alongside essential materials that can maybe help them with how they feel about workload. In our case, for example, we have a lot of optional activities, tasks in each week, and at least in the communication that I've had with students, and I'm not sharing the journal results now, but the kind of initial look at that I've had at the results, it shows that some students from particular backgrounds feel like they really need to tick box and do every single activity that they're given within a week, whether it is optional or essential, and if they can't do it, they have a sense of failure. So really, for them to be inducted into that form of study mode is very important for them to have a more realistic picture of what they're expected to do. Guided group work, providing students with initial support for getting to know each other, and before giving them full control of maybe making study groups. Some of them really come fresh, they have never had that experience, and that can put a lot of pressure on them and cause stress. Providing them with accessible guides and using online learning, particularly if you are still using online platform, and that shouldn't be limited to dense text, because that again, given their L2 competence, can put pressure on them if they cannot really easily understand the texts that provide guidelines. So maybe videos, audio recordings can also give a bit of a variation on what particularly the newer generation is used to, the genres that they're more used to, and opportunities for outside class, maybe in the case of online classes, live sessions, synchronous events, established relationship with peers, teachers, and other students. And finally, I know that, at least in the pre-sessional courses that I've been familiar with across the sector, there are extra opportunities for extracurricular activities, and fantastic. At Warwick, I remember we used to, I suppose that we still do them, take students to different towns and cities, but it's very important to make sure that those activities as well are planned in light of the weekly workload, because sometimes we might have all the good intention to do that, but students cannot necessarily enjoy that or benefit from it because they feel like they have to prioritize their study. It's high stake, it's important, and they can't fit it into their available time. So it's very important to take into account, see it through their lens as well when we are trying to address these different aspects of their needs. Sorry again for rushing through everything. Thank you very much.